Welcome to the Ellis podcast.
All right, everybody. Good to be with everyone. Today is Tuesday, 2 days until Christmas, and wanted to get a podcast out there of a rewind sessions film style focused on one of my favorite Christmas movies and favorite movies of all time. So excited to bring that to you. There's a lot going on right now. We've got football, end of year NFL stuff, lots of playoff scenarios being clinched or won or lost in any given game. We have the college football playoff ready to get to the next round of things. Murph and I will be recording something tomorrow and put out there to prepare us for the upcoming slate of NFL games, go over last week's games, talk a little bit about the college football games of the weekend. We've got combat sports heating up, an AEW pay-per-view coming up. So a lot going on, but I was remiss if I didn't get out a rewind sessions focused on a Christmas movie, and I had to do it on my favorite movie of all time. So a lot coming up this week and a lot coming up next week. I'll try to get recordings out there pretty often, might be every other day or so, but appreciate everybody viewing and listening. If, one ask I have is just please, if you are watching this on YouTube, click the like button, subscribe. That way, every new episode shows up in your podcast feed, in your video feed on YouTube. Just go to Ellis HQ, and that'll take you to my YouTube account. Also, follow me on social media. I put a lot of stuff out there, not just the stuff I'm recording, but messages, whether it's about sports or an entertainment topic. So on X and on Instagram, it's at Ellis HQ. So make sure you follow those. And then if you want to join the podcast or do something together, just email me, jamie@tellisellis.com. I would be all ears in doing a compilation with somebody or some type of collaboration and work on something together. Again, part of me doing this is to come closer to friends, family, acquaintances. What I've done with Murph has been great. It's brought us back together, and it's been so much fun to do. I think I'm going to be doing something with David Buckler next week. Many of you know David. If you don't, just a huge entertainment guy, huge sports guy. We'll probably do something on the NBA, but keep following along and appreciate you joining. And let's get to the podcast. Merry Christmas, everybody, and welcome back to the Rewind Sessions. Christmas has a way of slowing time down, or at least inviting us to try. It's difficult, but we try. We pause, sometimes reluctantly, and look backward. We look at the year, we look at our lives, at the choices we've made and the ones we didn't. We're invited to reflect, not just celebration, but reflection. We take stock. And every December, one movie has quietly asked us to do that for almost 80 years. It's a Wonderful Life is shown so often that it risks becoming background noise, something that's on in the corner while we're decorating a tree or while we wrap presents. But if you really sit with it, if you really watch it, you realize something surprising. This is not a cheerful movie that happens to take place at Christmas. It's a hard movie that ends at Christmas. So today, I want to rewind It's a Wonderful Life the way it deserves, as a film about doubt, disappointment, community, faith, and the terrifying question at the center of adulthood. What if the life you're living, the one that feels small, unfinished, or disappointing, isn't the one you dreamed of? And what if it still matters anyway? So the movie opens in complete darkness. It's not with snow, it's not with joy, but with voices or prayers. People all over Bedford Falls are praying, not for themselves, but for George Bailey. And before we ever meet George, the film is telling us something crucial, that this is not a story about success or failure, it's a story about worth. Up in heaven, the tone is gentle, even playful, but the stakes are serious. A man is in trouble, a life is unraveling. It's a Wonderful Life does something very few movies, especially Christmas movies, are brave enough to do. It takes despair seriously. George Bailey isn't just having a bad day. He is not just being dramatic. He isn't temporarily discouraged. He is a broken man. He is an empty man. The film takes George as a child and scene by scene, disappointment by disappointment, builds this fragile, delicate human being and allows us as viewers to watch this and sit with it. And it becomes very uncomfortable, and we have to sit there patiently. So this is a movie that understands something we don't talk about enough, and that is that the most dangerous moments in life often come after you've done everything right. So to understand It's a Wonderful Life, I think you have to understand Frank Capra at this exact moment in his life. So Frank directed and produced It's a Wonderful Life. Before World War II, Capra was Hollywood's greatest optimist. His films celebrated decency, democracy, and the idea that institutions could work if good people led them, that decency would be rewarded, and that the system, while imperfect, always bent towards justice. These weren't questions in Capra's early films. They were assumptions. He just assumed it. Like, think of Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, or It Happened One Night. He was the king of optimistic, idealistic American stories. And if you haven't seen either of these, they are just much watches, or you must watch them. As an aside, my wife made me watch Mr. Smith Goes to Hollywood when she was covering law and government and as a history teacher. And I'm glad she did, because Mr. Smith Goes to Washington is one of the great movies of all time. It's just tremendous. I definitely insist that you give it a shot and take a look at it. So that's who Capra was before he went to war. But then World War II broke out. Capra went to war, and he didn't just serve, he documented it. And he saw death up close. He watched young men dying. He watched entire worlds collapsing. He watched evil that wasn't easily defeated by good intentions. And when he returned home, the optimism that once felt natural now felt very fragile. He wasn't the same man. He struggled with depression, self-doubt, a loss of faith in the optimism he once championed. And here's the crucial point. Capra didn't know if the things he believed before the war were still true. So after the war, when Capra was ready to release It's a Wonderful Life, his first movie after the war, and it was also his first independent production, people were ready for the great American comeback story. You know, it was Frank Capra, the great American optimist, and Jimmy Stewart in this movie, who was the beloved everyman. But in It's a Wonderful Life, Capra does something he never did before. He allows his hero to break. And this isn't just a temporary break. It's not theatrically done. It is completely broken. George Bailey does everything right. He sacrifices endlessly. He serves his community and still ends up on a bridge wanting to disappear. That's not the worldview of a man celebrating victory. I think we would all agree with that. This is the worldview of a man asking, what if goodness isn't rewarded the way we tell people it will be like? Capra had never asked that question on screen before. Notice what the film does not do. Potter's never punished. The money that is lost by his uncle, by George's uncle, the money's never recovered. George's life is never fixed. And that's something that stuck with me as a watcher of this movie every year for 20 plus years. You don't know if George is okay at the end. So this is not the comeback story that I think viewers at the time wanted. If it was, it would have vindicated George. It would have destroyed Potter. It would have restored balance. But the film does none of that. Instead, it offers something quieter and riskier. It's meaning without resolution. And when you have meaning without resolution, that's not celebration, that's confession. And when the film underperformed financially, it absolutely crushed Capra. It wasn't just a professional disappointment. It confirmed his fear that maybe the world no longer believed what he believed. And that fear stayed with him for a long time. Hollywood changed, cynicism replaced idealism. Capra's voice felt out of step. Now, he would continue working, but he never again made a film that was this vulnerable, this searching, this exposed. And that's why It's a Wonderful Life feels like an ending. Even though it wasn't intended to be, it does feel like an ending. And here's the real irony of it. Audiences in 1946 weren't ready for a movie to be this honest, but later generations were. When you think, go forward from 1946 and fast forward to the 80s, later generations were ready for a movie like this. Maybe they weren't in 1946, but they were ready come, say, the 80s, because we live in a world that understands burnout, understands disillusionment, understands quiet despair behind success. So we recognize It's a Wonderful Life not as a fairy tale, but as a mirror. A comeback says, I was right all along. A confession says, I don't know if I'm right anymore, but this is what I still hope is true. So It's a Wonderful Life is Frank Capra standing in front of an audience and saying, I still believe in people. I'm just not sure it's enough. And that scares me. I mean, that is absolute vulnerability. And that vulnerability is why this film lasts. And that's why it was never a comeback. It was a confession. Comeback is made from confidence. A confession is made from doubt. And It's a Wonderful Life is filled with doubt. Capra later admitted that this film mirrored his own post-war depression, but he struggled to admit that publicly for years, but he ultimately did. So that's enough about Capra for now. Let's talk about our I'll call him a hero in the story, although that's funny that I call him hero when I don't know if you could really call him a hero in this story. So George Bailey is not tragic because he fails. He's tragic because he succeeds quietly. We meet George as a boy. He's energetic, curious, dreaming of far-off places. He wants to build bridges. He wants to build cities. He wants to see the world. And almost immediately in the movie, he's tested. At the very beginning, he saves his brother Harry from drowning. And in the process, George loses his hearing in one ear. George continues to be defined by interruption throughout the movie. Later, in Mr. Gower's drugstore, George notices something wrong, a mistake that could ruin lives, and again, he intervenes, quietly, nervously, and again, he pays for it. Gower slaps him in his bad ear, no less. And of course, George saves the building and loan when his father passes, and subsequently as Potter prowls, and George loses his future. The movie never frames these moments as heroic. Going back to when I said, talk about our hero. No, the movie really never frames him as heroic. They're framed as necessary. George is never allowed to be selfish long enough to be free. George doesn't wake up wanting responsibility. Responsibility finds him. And already a pattern is forming. George acts, George sacrifices, George moves on. But something is always taken. Here's what's important. This is very important. This is our first deep truth about George Bailey. George is not special because he's gifted. He's special because he responds. The movie never tells us George is wrong for resenting that. He's allowed to be angry. He's allowed to mourn the life he never lived. So, just a couple points about George in this story. His hearing loss isn't just a plot detail. It's symbolic of how sacrifice leaves permanent marks. And so, yes, he lost his hearing in the movie, but throughout the movie, he sacrifices. And those sacrifices leave different permanent marks, not just his hearing loss. Again, his hearing loss matters, but not just as that plot point. It's more of a symbol. So going on and talking about George, I mentioned George taking over the building and loan when his father died. As George grows in the movie, his dream sharpens. He wants to leave Bedford Falls. He wants to see the world. He wants a life that feels larger. And then his father dies. And just like that, George's life becomes very narrow. The building and loan, his father's quiet legacy, is under threat from Mr. Potter. Mr. Potter wants it gone, and someone has to stand in the gap. George does. Not because he wants to, but because no one else will. His brother Harry leaves for college. George stays, quote, temporarily. But that word temporarily does so much work in this movie. George believes his life is on hold, but that someday he's going to get back to his dream. But someday has a way of slipping away each and every time. You know, when I think about the movie, I mean, this is where the film just quietly breaks your heart. George doesn't just inherit a job from his dad, from his father, he inherits a way of seeing people as well. Peter Bailey believed institutions should serve people. Potter believes people should serve institutions, and that difference is the moral engine of this entire film. George doesn't just keep the building alone alive, he keeps his father's values alive, even when it costs him everything. And the sun rises and the sun sets day after day. George doesn't lose his dream in one dramatic moment. He loses it in installments throughout the whole movie. One obligation, one delay, one good deed at a time. George mourns the life he never lived. So it feels like an appropriate time now to bring in some other characters, and let me talk about Mary. Ultimately becomes Mary Bailey. George comes home from college and runs into Mary, who's played by Donna Reed. And Mary Bailey is one of the most misunderstood characters in classic cinema. She's often remembered as supportive, loving, and patient, and that's absolutely true. You see that throughout the movie. But what's overlooked is that Mary chooses George's life. She never tries to redirect him. She never shames him for wanting more. She doesn't fix him. She doesn't redirect his dreams, and she doesn't rescue him from despair. She simply says, if this is the life you're living, then I want to live it with you. Mary sees George exactly as he is, restless, frustrated, longing for more, and she says yes anyway. And that distinction matters. Mary doesn't save George from despair. She builds a life sturdy enough to hold his despair when it arrives. The honeymoon scene is probably the clearest example. Mary doesn't panic when there's a run on the bank. She doesn't argue. She just acts. She brings their honeymoon money to the bank to help George. She sees what George can't yet see, that a meaningful life doesn't require escape. She believes meaning can be built where you stand. And that's not romantic fantasy. I'll call it existential courage. Interesting note, Donna Reed, who played Mary, insisted that Mary be portrayed as emotionally intelligent and active, not passive. And that really comes through in the movie, subtly, but you can see it throughout the movie. For my generation, many may remember Donna Reed from appearing on The Love Boat. She was on a couple of cruises. Or as Miss Ellie in the 1984-85 season of Dallas, perhaps. An interesting tidbit that I know my good friend David Buckler knows, I'm certain he knows this. He probably has even told me this before. Donna Reed replaced Barbara Bell Geddes on the show in that 1984-85 season when Geddes wanted to take a step back from the show. But then she wanted to come back to the show for the 85-86 season, and when she was let back in, Donna Reed was abruptly fired. Reed sued in an attempt to stop production while she negotiated to be reinstated as Miss Ellie, and later sued for breach of contract. All that was settled out of court for about $1 million. Sadly, Reed died in 1986 at the age of 64 from pancreatic cancer, but she plays a lovely role in this movie, and again, one of the most subtly distinctive characters I've seen in a movie. So let's talk about some other people in Bedford Falls, and let's talk about the town in general. I mean, this movie doesn't belong to George alone. It belongs to Bedford Falls. And as years pass, something subtly happens. Lives improve, and it's not dramatic. It doesn't happen overnight, but it happens because George believes in people. Take Mr. Martini, for example. Martini is nervous. He's uncertain. He's an immigrant being asked to trust a system that hasn't always trusted in him. And Martini isn't just a punchline. He's a man being trusted, and that trust changes him. George gives him dignity, and dignity multiplies. If you recall at the end of the movie when Martini raises a glass at the end of the film, it's not gratitude, it's belonging. So Martini plays a very important role in this movie. Let's move to somebody else who's in the movie as a young girl and then as a woman, and that's Violet. Violet exists at the margins of Bedford Falls, and that's exactly the point. She's glamorous, she's independent, very flirtatious, even as a young child, flirtatious in the store. She doesn't fit the town's mold, and the town never quite knows what to do with her. So if Mary Bailey represents rootedness, Violet represents, I'll call it escape. She's the road not taken. But It's a Wonderful Life does something quietly radical with Violet. It refuses to turn her into either a cautionary tale or some romantic fantasy. Violet isn't evil. She isn't broken. She isn't redeemed. She's simply unsupported. And that matters. Violet also shows us that not everyone in Bedford Falls is equally held. The community that saves George does not save Violet. And the movie doesn't fix that. Again, this is one of those uncomfortable things that just doesn't get fixed in the movie. But that's important because the film, it keeps it honest. In a lesser film, Violet would be redeemed at the end. She would show up at the house. She would be embraced. She would be fixed. But It's a Wonderful Life doesn't do that because the movie isn't about universal rescue. It's about specific love. And that specifically gives the film weight. Violet lives in a space where beauty draws attention but not protection. Independence invites judgment, not support. Desire is visible, but belonging is conditional. So when Violet appears in Pottersville, she hasn't become worse. She's become more, I'll call it exposed, and that's a big distinction. It's tempting to contrast Violet and Mary as opposites, Mary being the good girl and Violet being the bad girl, but the film resists that simplicity. Mary thrives because she is chosen, she is anchored, she is surrounded by people who see her. Violet struggles because she's the opposite. Whereas Mary was chosen, Violet is desired, but she's not chosen. Where Mary is anchored, Violet is seen, but she's not embraced or held. Mary is surrounded by people who see her, but Violet is known, but she's not claimed by the community. So this isn't a moral judgment, it's a social one. Violet reinforces several of the movie's core themes, and that is that ordinary goodness has limits. Community is powered, but it's imperfect. Meaning doesn't arrive evenly. In some lives, they just remain unresolved. Let's talk about another character in the movie, Sam Wainwright. I feel like doing the hee-haw, but I won't do that. That would be really bad. Sam Wainwright is everything George Bailey thought he wanted to be. Sam leaves Bedford Falls. He sees the world. He invents something. He gets rich. And I think it's important, though, throughout this to remember Sam's not portrayed as a cruel, greedy, or corrupt person in the movie. And that's what makes him really effective. Sam doesn't exploit George. He doesn't mock him. He doesn't even forget him. He simply moves on. I remember the first few times I watched the movie and I thought Sam was, to use a wrestling phrase, I thought that Sam was a heel in the movie. I thought he was the bad guy who was going to make George and Mary's relationship strained. I also thought he would battle George, thus generating negative emotion from George. None of this happens. In a lesser movie, Sam would be arrogant, empty, and secretly miserable, but he's none of those things. Sam is generous. He tries to help George. Heck, he wants George to join him. And yet Sam is not present. His life operates at a distance. Through phones, wire transfers, jokes shouted through receivers. Think about all those forms of communication in the movie where Sam is communicating in some way. He's always available and never there. George sacrifices presence for responsibility. Sam sacrifices responsibility for freedom. Neither path is necessarily framed as sinful, but one builds community. Sam's success creates wealth where George's presence creates belonging. And that distinction is everything in this movie. Mary and Sam don't end up together. Clearly there is interest, but Mary doesn't choose Sam. It's not because he's unworthy, but because Sam doesn't stay. Mary chooses again presence. That's the same choice she makes with George. Sam Wainwright isn't the villain of It's a Wonderful Life. He's the proof that success isn't the same thing as significance. So I think I've covered a lot of Sam Wainwright there, probably more than intended in the movie. I don't know. But there are these subtleties throughout the movie. This is why I think this is not only one of the best, well, the best Christmas movie of all time. This ranks in my top movies of all time. It is an incredible film. Let's talk about Uncle Billy for a second. Uncle Billy is fragile. He's forgetful. He's a little different, right? But he's human, and that matters. Uncle Billy's failure hurts because he's human. The film refuses to give us a clean villain to blame. That's just true. If Uncle Billy were evil, George's suffering would feel clean. But it isn't. It's messy. It's born of love and weakness, not malice. And that's why it hurts. I have to talk about a couple other characters here as well. How about Ernie and Bert, right? The cab driver, the cop. They don't deliver speeches in the movie, but they do have a presence in the movie. And I want to dispel some myth around their characters. So apparently, Ernie and Bert were not chosen by Jim Henson as names for two of his Sesame Street characters, okay? Not directly based on the film, at least. He did not go in and say, Ernie and Bert in Sesame Street are Ernie and Bert from It's a Wonderful Life. He did not directly come out and say that. However, and some of his production staff have made this clear, they do open the door for the fact that the movie characters may have influenced Ernie and Bert on Sesame Street a bit. So there is no direct, oh yes, Ernie and Bert are 100% derived from It's a Wonderful Life, but there is some connectivity there. Again, going back to their role in the movie, Ernie and Bert, they are just two men who show up and play these small roles. Let me take that back. They play pretty big roles in very small scenes in the movie. Let me talk about George and Mary's children, just briefly. George's children don't understand the sacrifices that George makes. And that's realistic, right? They're kids. They don't understand the adult world. They don't understand sacrifice. Legacy is rarely appreciated in real time, but it's felt later. And you have to think that as these children grow up, they would embrace who their father was. Now, let's talk about another character in the movie, the antagonist, I'll call him, and that's Mr. Potter. You know, Mr. Potter never changes, and that's important. The movie doesn't offer redemption for everyone, and that honestly gives it weight. Potter represents a system, not a man, and it's a system where value is measured only in dollars. He keeps the money, he keeps the power, and he keeps nothing else. He never raises his voice, he calculates. In fact, he offers George everything, money, power, escape, at the cost of George's soul, of course, but Potter does offer it to him. Mr. Potter doesn't need to win emotionally. He already owns the board, and when George refuses to join Mr. Potter, Potter doesn't rage. He just waits, because systems like Potter's doesn't need anger. They just need time. So while I called him an antagonist, and he clearly was the antagonist in the movie, he is not a villainous, ravaging, yelling and screaming and awful character. He is playing a role that is somewhat realistic in a capitalist society. Even Pottersville, even that world, when they show those scenes of it, as George is looking back at a life that didn't have him in it, Pottersville isn't chaotic and evil. It's transactional. It's a world without grace. Everything costs something. No one belongs. You know, it's interesting. Capper achieved this not by changing sets. He had the same sets out there, but he changed the sound, the lighting, and the pacing. Look at that when you watch the movie and they flash to Pottersville. It's all the same scenery, just with added lights, sound, and pacing. Pottersville's louder, faster, and brighter, but it's It's kind of hollow. It's empty. Capra actually instructed actors in Pottersville to speak faster and louder to create emotional exhaustion. So just if you look at that scene, think about that when you watch it the next time. And now I want to talk about Clarence just a little bit. I mean, he plugs into this movie so well, right? Clarence does not lecture George. He does not shame him. He witnesses him. And there's, the faith element of this movie is very strong. Grace doesn't argue you out of despair. It reveals what despair can't see. George runs home, not to escape, but to belong. The miracle isn't money, it's memory. People show up quietly, gratefully. George's life mattered even when he couldn't see it. And George's problems won't vanish. They don't. The movie refuses that comfort. Again, I talked about that at the beginning. You're not left feeling 100% great that everything is fine and George is going to be the hero. He's going to have his issues down the road. But instead, it offers something better. It offers community. Meaning doesn't arrive as reward. It arrives as recognition. Clarence writes in the book, Tom Sawyer, he writes, "No man is a failure who has friends." That line has become so comforting. It's familiar and it almost feels like, to me, it feels safe. The bell rings. And by the way, the bell ringing was added late, almost reluctantly, and became the film's most enduring image, right? So that scene was almost a non-scene. Clarence, of course, gets his wings, and for the first time, George hears something he missed all along. He hears acknowledgement. Look, It's a Wonderful Life doesn't promise happiness. Talked about that throughout. It promises that your presence matters, even when you can't see it. And that may be the most honest Christmas message ever filmed. So as we close this Christmas rewind session, maybe the gift isn't inspiration, maybe it's permission to believe that showing up matters, that staying matters, that the quiet life might be the brave one, and that's okay. That's okay. I hope you enjoyed listening or watching this podcast as much as I did watching the movie time and time again, year after year, taking notes on it. I take notes on everything. And I have notes from this movie back so many years ago. And it has been such a thrill to take those notes and put them into this podcast. And, I just hope you appreciate it. And I certainly hope you appreciate this movie. Merry Christmas to everybody. No matter where you are in life. Look, life is hard. And sometimes there isn't a magic answer. Sometimes it's just realizing, especially at this time of the year, that surrounding yourself with loved ones and friends who care so much, that's meaningful. Don't always try to look for an easy answer. Just try to stay absorbed in the framework in which you live. And that includes the people that you're with every day and that you love and that they love you. Thank you for watching or listening. And I will certainly be back to do another movie, another rewind sessions, probably non-holiday version with the next episode. Thanks to everybody and have a very, very, very Merry Christmas. All right, so that's the Rewind Sessions classic films, and It's a Wonderful Life. I feel like going and watching it right now. I'll be honest with you. Do a little gift wrapping, sit in front of the tree, look at my Advent candles burning, and watching a little It's a Wonderful Life. It is truly one of my favorite films of all time. So I'm going to keep doing these rewind sessions. Again, the films will get different. I'll review albums and songs as I have in the past. And of course, we will always hit the sports side of things. I love it all. I really do. And I hope you enjoy it as well. As I said, have a very Merry Christmas, and I will be back with you very soon. Take care, everybody.